Hi there. I hear that you want to learn a little bit about music and a little bit about music theory and what music is constructed of. So thank you for coming to this class, this lesson, this one-on-one, where we're just going to talk about music a little bit. We're going to focus on the piano here that we have, and we're going to talk about some of the components of music, and hopefully you find it interesting and useful, and it's knowledge that we can build from. We're going to be focusing mainly on some theory today, specifically about pitch and intervals. Music, like any subject, has various different components that is made up of. And one of, obviously, the most important elements of music is pitch. It's, what we build melody from, harmony, and without pitch, really, music would just be, really, rhythm. But we're not going to talk about rhythm today, really. We're going to talk about pitch. Now, this piano here, yes, it is. It's a lovely red. It's a lovely stage piano that has a lovely red finish. It is not an acoustic piano. It's an electric piano, hence all these knobs. And has lots of different sounds on it that we can call upon, but we'll just stick with a piano sound today. Hopefully you can hear that. Yes, so the piano is an instrument that a lot of people play, particularly here in the West. And it is very much part of the Western tradition, I'd say, in terms of how it divides pitch up. As you can see, we have these individual keys, and each one of these keys plays a different note. And if we look closely at the pattern of keys here, there might be a few things we can notice about them. The first observation is that we have white keys and we have black keys, and those are the only two types. But you may notice that there's sort of a pattern here between the black and the white keys. So you might notice that we have groups of 2 black notes that are sort of together. Then we have a bit of a gap. Then we have 3 black notes. Then we have another gap. Then we have 2 again. Then we have a gap. And then we have 3 again. And then this pattern continues on, but obviously you can't see beyond here and here. So we'll just look at this section of the piano. But the rest of the piano is the same. There are a series of 2 black notes together and 3 black notes together. And so if we look at a pattern between the first black note that's part of a group of 2 and the next black note that's part of a group of 2, let's count how many there are. So there's this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we get back to another black note. And this is what we will call an octave. The distance between this note and this note. And if we listen to these notes, and then we listen to the higher one, you may notice that obviously this one is higher. This one is higher, this one is lower. So the lower we go down, the further left we go, the lower we go. The further right we go, the higher we go. But these are actually sort of the same note. They sound very similar. because this note is simply this note but an octave up. So in terms of pitch, these two notes are the most related because they're exactly an octave apart. So the piano is a series of octaves of notes that you find again and again up and down the piano. And so if we play any note, so for instance this note here, and we find it an octave up, we hear that they are kind of the same note. There's just one that's an octave up, that's higher, and one that's an octave down. They sound very pleasant together. They sound right. They sound very similar. The vibrations of those two frequencies come together very nicely, as opposed to, say, this. There's a lot more tension in that. So I hope that makes sense. Now, of course, music across the world doesn't always divide octaves into 12 notes. There is music and instruments that divide music into more intervals. You can divide it into as many intervals as you want, really. Because if you think about someone who's singing, for instance, they can glide from a low note to a high note, and they can hit all of the notes in between. But the piano is an instrument that has fixed pitches, and the way music has developed has meant that the piano has 12 pitches per octave, and that has become standard. And that's based on some Western ideas about frequencies and the series of overtones, but that's a very complex thing that we're not going to get into today. So, of course, what we've learned so far is we have black notes and white notes, and that there is a pattern to these black notes and white notes that repeats every 12 notes. Now, obviously, it would be quite useful for us to name these notes, so we can have a common vocabulary to what we're talking about. So, if we find a note anywhere on this piano here, let's say this one. So we've got this note here. Now, what we can recognise about it is that it is next to a black note on the right and a white note on the left. Now, there's also a note here that has a black note to the right and a white note to the left. And they look quite similar, don't they, because of the shape of how that creates the groove where the black note is. But the difference between these two notes is that this note is against a cluster of 2, and this note is against a cluster of 3. Now, in order to name notes, the standard way that we do it is we give them letters. And this note here is what we call C. Specifically middle C, because it's actually the centre of the piano, which you can't see here. But this is the centre of the piano, and so we call it middle C. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, C, alphabet. Why C? Why not A? Well, that's because A is actually the start of the piano, which we can't see. It's all the way down there. But if we go back down 2 keys, down 1, down 2, we found A. So this is A, this is B, this is C, this is D, E, F, G. And then you might notice that this note is the same shape and pattern as this note. So this is an octave again. So this is also A, but this is an octave up A, and this is A an octave down. Does that make sense? So we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And that pattern will continue up the piano and down the piano. Now, a very studious question is, well, what about the black notes? You were telling us that there are 12 notes in every octave, and you've just gone from A to G, which is only 7. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. 7. So what about these black notes? Well, we give these black notes, they don't have their own letter. They're only ever referred to in relation to these white notes. So the white notes have letters, and the black notes are descriptions of these letters. Now you may notice that if we start at A, for instance, we could go up to a black note, or we could go down to a black note. And the way we describe these black notes is as sharps and flats. Now, you may have heard people say that before. You may hear if someone sings a song and someone goes, "Ooh, they're a bit flat," or "Ooh, they're a bit sharp." What that means is they're slightly too high or slightly too low. So if we say A, sharp, we're sharpening the notes, we're raising the pitch, we're making it brighter, and we find A sharp. And if we say A flat, we're starting from A, and we're lowering the note, we're making it duller, and so we find A flat. Does that make sense? Now obviously what you may notice about some of these black notes is that they are next to more than one note. For instance here, this black note is next to A, so it's A flat, but it's also next to G, which means it can also be G sharp. So A flat and G sharp are the same note. They sound the same. On the piano, you find them in the same place. But depending on the context of the music that we're playing and how we're thinking about the music, we will call it a different thing. Because after all, music is the sounds we hear, the letters that we use, the way we arrange the notes, the facts that we have, black notes and white notes. All of that is just part of our way of trying to categorize and find a language for music. So there is no difference between G sharp and A flat. The difference is in the context in which we're playing, and which would be easier and more useful for us to help describe what we're doing and why we're playing that note. Lovely. So let's have a little look now. So we've looked at all the notes. So let's have a look. Let's have a little test quickly. So if I point at this note, what note is this? Yes, that's right, that's C. And if I point to this note, what note's that? Yes, so this would be F. We've got C, D, E, F. Fantastic. They look quite similar, don't they? How about this note? That's E, well done. And what about this note? Yes, that is D. Now, how about this note? D sharp, very good. Does it have another name? That's right, it's also E flat, because we have E here. How about this note? Yes, this is F sharp and G flat. Very good. Fantastic, so we've learnt how to look at the piano. So rather than just seeing it as a mess of loads of notes, we're now able to differentiate between them. When in doubt, I'd say, because obviously you're new to the piano, so it's hard to remember which note is which. If you know what one note is, so if we know this is A, we can work out by counting up or counting down what the other notes are. But when in doubt, I say try to find C. And C is the note that is next to a cluster of 2, but it's just to the left. And it has this distinctive shape that F also has. But F is next to a cluster of 3. And if you can do that, slowly what you'll do is you'll start to recognise these notes as having quite individual ways of looking. So rather than, so when I look at this piano, I don't see a sea of white and a sea of black. I see individual notes. I will always recognise that as G, because I see that it has this distinctive shape, because it has a black note either side. But I also recognise that there's an extra black note over here when I look at it. So I see it as G, as opposed to A, it looks very similar to G. but I recognise that it has an extra black note over here. So I can differentiate between the two. Very good. So, let's talk about how we use these notes. If I play a couple of notes at the same time, let's say a few, let's say 4, that sounds alright, doesn't it? What about this? That sounds alright. What about this? That doesn't sound quite so nice. And this is when we're going to start talking about scales and harmony. So we have 12 notes that we can use, and we can use them in different octaves, so they can be higher and they can be lower, but they're essentially the same notes. But we don't necessarily want to use all of them in a certain piece of music, in a song, all at one time. We could play a piece that has all of these notes in, but it's unlikely that we'd want to use all of them at once, unless we were going for a certain effect, which is, something that sounds really muddy and clustery and chaotic, perhaps. So we call these scales. Scales are a group of notes that we're using in a certain piece of music, in a song, or a part of a piece. So it might be just a section of a piece of music. We will use a certain scale. So scales are just us selecting from the 12 notes which notes we're going to use. So we can have scales that have 8 notes in them. We can have scales that have 6 notes in them, 5 notes in them, 4 notes in them. It can really be any number of notes. It's unlikely that you'd refer to using 2 notes as being a scale, for instance, or 3, because you're just using 3 notes. It sort of needs to be probably 5 or more, really, for us to call it a scale. And it's just us selecting for this piece what notes we're going to use. And so, let's think about some scales then. So, one of the most commonly used scales we have is called the major scale. And that is a group of 7 notes that repeats. And the most common, or the simplest, major scale we have is the C major scale. So we start from C, we found middle C here, and we work our way up to another C. We're going to play all of the white notes and none of the black. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we have C again. And you might notice that this scale sounds quite bright, it sounds quite happy. And that's often how people describe it. It's a relatively happy key, I'd say. It's a lot of music. It's based on this scale. And it's just a series of 7 notes. And then C. And the important thing to think about with this is that obviously with C major, so C refers to the note we start on, and the major refers to the scale we're going to use, is that it is just the white notes. And that's why it's really easy for people to learn. But we can start with any letter, and then say major afterwards, and it'll be the same scale, but just starting on a different note. So for instance, if I said G major, we'd start on G, and then we'd work our way up. Now, as you've noticed, I played a black note here. I didn't play this white note. And that's because we're looking at the relationship, the intervals between the notes. So we look at C major. We're ignoring the black notes because we're not playing them, but we have to take them into consideration in terms of the scale, because the difference between C and D is not 1 note, really. It's 2, because we have this note here. So we're going up 2 notes. Then between D and E, we're going up 2 notes. But then between E and F, we're only going up 1 note. Then between F and G, we're going up 2 notes. Between G and A, we're going up 2 notes. between A and B, we're going up 2 notes, and then B and C, we're going up 1. So, we can say that as we're going up 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. That's quite a nice pattern to remember. 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. Okay, so when we start from G, we have to use the same pattern. So we're going up 2, 2, 1, great. It's only the white notes we needed so far. 2, 2, we need to go up 2, so we find this black note, and then we go up 1 to G. And so what you'll find is that if we stick with our major scales, C major has no black notes, and then G major has 1. And if we start with different letters, you'll find that each one of those letters will require a different number of black notes. So for instance, D major will have 2, A major will have 3, E major will have 4, and we can get more complicated because we can also start with a black note, but we won't talk about that today. So we've looked at scales. Now obviously we could also use a scale that, for instance, only has 5 notes. Let's look at a scale that only has 5 notes. So let's say, what scale shall we look at? Let's have a look at the minor pentatonic. So the pentatonic, as in pentagon, as in 5, and minor refers to the tonality of the sound. So unlike major, minor is a darker sound. Some people might describe it as sadder. I wouldn't call it sadder, I'd say it's darker. It has more of a sinister, darker sound to it. Now, the easiest way to show this is with the black notes, actually, because we only have 5 black notes. See that? If we start from this one, which is C sharp, and we work our way up, this is also C sharp. So we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if we start here on E flat or D sharp, and we play the 5 notes, it fits with our hand quite nicely, doesn't it? Because we've got our thumb, 2nd finger, 3rd finger, 4th finger, 5th finger. That is the minor pentatonic. So we have this note, E flat. We go up 3 notes to find this note, G flat. We go up 2 notes to find A flat, 2 notes to find B flat, and 3 notes to find D flat. This is our minor pentatonic. So if we start on C instead, let's find the C minor pentatonic. So we're going to go up 3 to find D flat. We're going to go up, how many do we go up next? We're going to go up 2 to find F. We're going to go up 2 again to find G. And then we're going to go up 3 to find B flat. And so we end up with C, E flat, F, G, B flat. And you notice that has a very different sound to major, doesn't it? Major sounds brighter, more sprightly, possibly happier, you could say. It sounds possibly more boring, you might say. It sounds more classical. It sounds a bit more middle of the road. Whereas this scale, it sounds bluesier. It sounds more, I suppose you could say more jagged in a sense, because the gaps between the notes are bigger. Some of the notes are bigger, and there are less of them. It has a very different feeling. And so some music will use this minor pentatonic music, and some music will use the major. But if we use all of the notes, we don't have any definition of what we're doing. Obviously we can, it's a choice, But it's good to think of music like anything else. If we were making a recipe, we don't want to put all the flavours in our food, because if you put all the flavours in, we sort of end up with no flavours, if that makes sense. So if you're making, I don't know, a pasta dish, we could have 2 different pasta dishes that are equally very, very tasty, very, very nice, but they can taste completely differently because of the ingredients we've used. We might use a tomato-based sauce, or we might use a cheese-based sauce. But if we do both, we end up with sort of neither. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a strange anecdote, but I hope that makes sense. It's a bit like if you're using colour in a room, you're painting your walls, you're decorating a room. If you paint the walls every colour, you end up with no coherent idea for a room. One wall's blue, one wall's green, one wall's red, one wall's orange. It can be an overwhelming amount of information. But if we just go, you know what, we're just going to choose 2 colours. We're just going to decorate this space with, let's think, we're going to decorate this space with a lovely sort of dark green, and we're going to have some burnt orange in there. That might work quite nicely. And so it's sometimes less is more. And so scales are us restricting all the notes we have available to a select few. Could be 5, 6, 7. Could be 4. It's restricting which notes we're going to use. And obviously we can break the rules. If we're playing C major, I could decide that I want to play an F sharp. But it's a choice to choose that note, rather than just hear all the notes. Great, so that makes sense. Now obviously, so we talked about scales, but how can we use these scales? Well, we can use scales for melody, so we can use scales for a melody we're going to play, so a tune that works through time. So if we're on C major, I can choose any of the white notes. That's a little tune. It's not a particularly good tune, but it's reasonably good. You could remember it. And so we're just choosing one note at a time and creating a tune from the notes in the C major scale. But we can obviously also play notes at the same time. So for instance, C and E, play them at the same time. And this is what we call harmony. So melody are different notes through time, and harmony are different notes played at the same time. I mean, that's not strictly true, but that's the basic way to think of it. So, we can also think of notes in terms of harmony, 2 notes at the same time. And we tend to build our harmonies, or at least our basic harmonies, off of what we call thirds, which is the interval between notes. So if we start with C, and we think of this as 1, and we think of the next note up, let's just start with the white notes for now, and we think of the next note, white note up, D, we call that a second. Now it may be a little bit confusing because we just go, well, it's just that 1 note, so why is it not just a first, or just 1 note up? But we think of it as a second because we include C as 1. So it's like, the note we start with is our 1 note, so it's a second. The interval between the 2 is a second. Now if we go up another note to E, then we'd have a third. So we start with 1, this is a second, this is a third, this would be a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, a 7th, and then an 8th, which is an octave. Which makes sense now, octave, as in 8, like an octagon, octave, 8. So we would base them on thirds. Now, you may notice, what about all these black notes? Do they not get involved? Well, they do get involved. And the way they get involved is that we can call these intervals different things. So C to D is a second, but it's specifically a major second. Major meaning brighter, meaning maybe slightly happier, some might say. I've said that a lot today. And it's the sort of way people tend to refer to it at this stage. But we can also look at this. C sharp or D flat. This is also a second, but this would be a minor second. And it's minor because it's darker, it's lower than the D. So C to D, that's a major second. C to D flat, that's a minor second. And so we can use that rule across all of the intervals. So C to E, that's a major third, but C to E flat, that's a minor third. Now you may notice that because there's no black note here, we only have one type of fourth. We just have a perfect fourth. We don't call it major or minor because if there's major, that implies that there can also be a minor, and there can't be a minor here. So it's just a perfect fourth. Let's avoid 5 for now. Let's move to 6. So we can have a major 6. We can also have a minor 6. We can have a major 7. We can also have a minor 7. Now, the 5th is slightly different. A bit like the 4th, we call this note here a perfect 5th. And the reason for that is that after the octave, the note that is most similar to C after the octave is G. That is the next interval that is the most perfect, I guess you could say. I mean, that's a bit tenuous what I'm saying, but essentially that's the case. So this is a perfect 5th. There is no such thing as a major 5th and a minor 5th. If we go to this note, that's a diminished 5th. Diminished, at this point, you can think of it as similar to minor. It just means lower, flatter, darker. So that's a diminished 5th. And that's a perfect 5th. Does that make sense? I know there's a little bit of confusion there with some of those ideas. It's a bit confusing. We're talking about minor and major, and then we're talking about perfect and sort of diminished. Just don't worry about that for now. Don't worry about perfect and diminished. Just know that these notes are special. If you've got 5 notes, the 5th of any scale is a special note. I mean, they're all special notes, but the 5th is special in that way. So if we're looking at harmony, we're going to tend to build in a way that is based on thirds. So if we start with C, we go up a third, a major third, we find E. That sounds quite nice, doesn't it? Now we can go up another third. So this is already a chord. This is a harmony. We've got 2 notes played at the same time. This is harmony. We can also go up another third. Let's go up to G. Now this is a minor third between E and G, because there's no black note here, which means between C and E we've gone up 1, 2, 3, 4 notes, and between E and G we've gone up 1, 2, 3 notes. So it's 1 less, so it's a minor third. And this, we now have a really nice chord. And we're going to call this C major. And the reason we're going to call it C major is because the middle note is a major third. So we have C major. Now if we change this middle note to be E flat, so a minor third above C, that's now C minor, because the middle note is a minor third above the first note. So we have C major and C minor. Now we can do that with any starting note. So if we start with G, here we are, and we go up a major third, so we can go up four notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. major third, and we go up another third, a minor third, we now have G major. And if we use this note, the flat and B flat, we have G minor. Yeah, I understand that might be a bit confusing. But essentially that's all chords are. We tend to think of them in thirds. And we can also add extra thirds above. So if we start with a C, for instance, here, we're going to go up. We're going to have C, we're going to have E, we're going to have G. We can go up another third. So we could choose B or B flat, because that's another third. Oh, now we're starting to sound jazzy, aren't we? We could have the one below. Oh, that also sounds jazzy, but a bit darker. We could even go up another third. So a third from B flat. Let's go up a major third. We could end up with a D. So we're going to have C, E, G, B flat and D. Oh, even jazzier. And then we could also go up another third to get F. That's quite jazzy, but it sounds a bit more clashy now. We could maybe have the F sharp instead. Lovely. We can just keep doing that. And eventually, if you add all the thirds in, and then you'll play loads of notes. You'll end up playing, you could end up quite quickly playing all 8 notes of your scale, but just spread out across the piano in thirds. And they all have names, but we won't go into that too much. But they're all referred to in major and minor senses, because major and minor is talking about the relationship of our thirds. Fantastic. So let's just have a little think about what we've talked about today. Obviously, the more we talk about it, the more concepts we come across, and the more concepts we come across, the more room there is for confusion and for things that don't quite make sense. That's, an idea might make sense, but then when we develop it, suddenly there's something that's contradictory, that contradicts what I've just said. But the key thing with music or learning anything, I think, in a way, is to embrace confusion, embrace contradiction, embrace uncertainty, and just keep moving forward. But let's have a think about what we've learned today, because we've actually covered quite a lot. We've talked about the piano and how the piano is arranged into a series of how many notes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's a series of 12 notes that is repeated up and down the piano. But within those 12 notes, we can find octaves. And that's based on the idea of a 8-note scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, it's a 7-note scale, but the 8th note is the same as the first. So we've talked about that. We've talked about how we can name notes. So any note that's a white note has an alphabetical letter, and any black note is referred to as a flat or a sharp, depending if we're coming up to the note from A, or if we're coming down to the note from B. So that's a sharp, and that's a flat. We've talked about scales, different types of scales, how we can choose 8 notes, 7 notes, 6 notes, 5 notes. We could choose 4 notes or 3 notes, or 2 notes if we really wanted. And we can give those scales names. So we have a shared vocabulary. We're working with other musicians. And we've talked about harmony. Now, harmony tends to be built up of thirds, which is quite a nice spacing for the hand. If we look at, say, here, it's, my thumb and middle finger and my 5th finger quite easily fit into that place of, how can I do this? Oh, do that quite easily with being that place of thirds. And we can call those our basic chords that have 3 notes in them. We can call them major, and we can call them minor if the middle note goes down 1. Very good. And, really, that is 90% of music, in a way. In terms of pictures, that is 90% of music. Everything else from this point onwards, it obviously can get quite complicated, but that's all detail, nuance. That's all, quite specific stuff. That actually covers most of it. Our major and minor chords cover a lot of music. We don't need to know about other kinds of chords for a lot of music. If that makes sense. So, obviously they're basic chords. They're all chords that are far more complex, but basic is also the most. Basic also means that they are the most widely used, the most what would the word be? They are the notes. Oh, can you hear my tummy rumbling? They are the chords that most frequently are going to come up. So if you see someone say a chord and they say, "Oh, D major," you'll go, "Oh, I kind of know what that is." That's 3 notes based on thirds between each other, and the middle note is going to be a major third above the bottom note. So we have D, and then we're going to have a major third above, and then we're going to have a minor third above that to get the F, which is the 5th of D. Yeah? Well, thank you for coming today and taking this lesson with me. I hope you found it useful and interesting. I hope your brain doesn't hurt too much. I hope you find that useful. And let me know if you'd like to book another lesson and we can start looking at some other concepts in terms of chords, in terms of scales. We could look at rhythm as well. But for these lessons with the piano in front of us like this, I think looking at harmony, melody, and theory in that way is probably a lot easier to talk about, rather than a lesson that is far more practical, where we are actually doing things, doing exercises, getting music into our hands. So, yes, thank you, and I'll see you around at the at another lesson or down at the jazz club. Have a great rest of your day.